Good afternoon, everyone. We are now in the book of Exodus, in chapter 16. By way of review, in chapter 15, they actually crossed the Red Sea, and I suggest that it will be at the Gulf of Aqaba. And this part here is called the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds. And they crossed from the Sinai Peninsula to the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. As they had crossed the Red Sea, the event that they saw was that God attacked the Pharaoh and his army, and they were all drowned in the sea itself. And they saw them float up and came rested on the shores. Immediately, they broke out into a song, and chapter 15 records that song. And in the song, it really gives us a glimpse of how Moses understood God, knew God, and the acclamation of what actually happened to give praise and glory to God. And because without God, they would not have survived the onslaught from Pharaoh and his special army. Now that they've crossed over, the first place they went was a place called Marah. The place of Marah had bitter water, and so in their complaint, they realized that they can't just go back. And the water wasn't good, and God did a miracle and healed the waters. And so we understand the idea of healing the waters was really to restore the water and made it sweet, fresh, nice, and sweet. Not sweet in terms of taste, but sweet in terms of freshness. Now, in chapter 16, as we continue, they went from Marah to a to a place called Elim. And Elim is a place where they had a time where they could settle in. And that place was further into the wilderness, if you want to see it that way, which means that if you put yourselves into the shoes of the then Israelites, they have ran away from Egypt all the way to the edge of the Sinai Peninsula, crossed over, and came to Mara and then to Elim. And chapter 16 says, and they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. And the wilderness of Sin is between Elim and Sinai. Now, Sinai would be the Mount Sinai, if you want to put it that way. And a date was given on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt, which means that they have spent 30 days in their travel. In that 30 days, it was very, very eventful. Now, there is a parallel passage, and this passage comes from Numbers 33. And if you read from verses 9 to 16, you will find that there is a little bit more of details that's been given, because it says that when they came to the wilderness of Sin, it seemed that it was next door to Elim, which is not true. The wilderness of Sin is very, very big, and it spans the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And we could see that there would be the Sea of Reeds, the wilderness of Sin, Dofka, and Alush. They're all part and parcel of the wilderness of Sin, which we read in Numbers chapter 33. It was a place in the wilderness of Sin at this time, somewhere between Elim and Sinai. Our opinion is that Sinai is somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. And so before they arrived at Sinai, but they have left Elim, they are in that middle ground and is also called the wilderness of Sin. After 30 days, 15th day of the second month, after they left from the land of Egypt, verse 2. It says here, then, and this would be and then. By this time, you can understand that when they left Egypt, they had unleavened bread, they had brought some food, and then they realized the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained. They they grumble. So this word complain is grumble. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. You need to pause to think about it. After 30 days, they've been wandering, crossed the Red Sea, Mara, Elim, and then further in. Then they realized they were running out of food. They also realized one thing. When they look back, they can't go back to Egypt. One of the reasons why God took them through this passageway or this journey is that by themselves, they will not be able to return to Egypt. Because once they cross the Red Sea, there is no way for them to go back. Now they realize by which time that food is going to be scarce. Verse 3 says, and then in the grumbling of the children of Israel, the children of Israel said to Moses and Aaron, and they said this, oh, that we had died in the hand of the Lord of Jehovah in the land of Egypt. It would have been better for us to have died there in Egypt by the hand of God. Why did God save us except for us to come into the wilderness, which they have never been, they've never seen? Then they realize they can't go back through the Red Sea. They're going to die here because they have ran out of food. And so this is what they are complaining. When we sat by the pots of meat, the idea here is meat here is flesh. In Egypt, there is both bread and meat to eat. And then when they ate bread, and bread is bread, right? Bread, they could use it for bread and cakes. And they can eat until they are full. That is what eating is all about. In the Eastern Oriental concept of eat, it is eat till you are full. It is not to munch on things, and that's very westernized in the modern day. And so these are two things that we need to pay attention to right now. They are complaining about meat, they are complaining about bread. Now, one of the things that we need to understand in the time where they are, that bread is eaten in the day and meat is eaten at night, which means that very similar to us today, they actually have a heavy meal at night. The modern health advice is to have eat heavy in the day and then eat light at night. But Eastern Oriental people, being Eastern Oriental people, they eat bread in the day because they need the carbohydrates, and then they enjoy their food at night to have meat, and they have time to chew and enjoy. And so that's the Eastern Oriental way of having meals. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger, because they've ran out of food. That's what I'm trying to tell all of us. So at this point in time, in verse 4, we have these consecutive narratives. After they complained to Aaron and Moses, God said to Moses, He said this, says, Behold, look, I will rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a certain amount every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the sixth day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. I want to spend a little bit of time for us to understand this. The first idea here is the rain. Bread coming from the skies. We're not talking about heaven as in the abode of God. It's from the skies. You look up like rain. Oh, the water is dropping down. And so they call that rain. And so bread rain from the heavens. And so God says, I will do this. I will send it down from heaven, and it's dropped down. It is not grown from the ground. It is not brought over by somebody. It is not popped up from inside the ground, but it's from the skies for you all. So verse 4 says, I will do all of this for you all. And the people shall go out. So you need to work, gather, collect. And it says here, collect a certain quota. Now, this idea of a certain quota literally means a certain amount that is a day's ration. A day's ration every day. So you have to work every day that I may test them. This is very important because if you go back and read Deuteronomy chapter 8 and in verse 3, why did God send them around for so long? So that he can test to see whether they would choose to follow God or not. And so this is the beginning of those tests. The idea of testing here is to prove them. So you can think of test as to prove, to test, to tempt. Don't think of tempt as a bad thing. Think of tempt as a generic word. I think we've used the idea of tempt in a very negative way. The idea here as a test is to see what they would choose. Would they choose to listen to God, or would they choose not to listen to God? And that's the whole intent. From here on, the way to test is if they will walk in my Torah or not. And so there is a 50-50, isn't it? When you can say you can choose to do it or choose not to. And so God says he will rain down bread for this particular purpose, to test them if they will walk in my Torah or not. And the rule is this: every day you pick, but on the sixth day, they shall bring in twice as much. This is the end of verse 5. The idea here is they will try to bring in two times more. Two times. Although the English calls it twice, it shall be two times as much as they gather daily. On a daily basis, there is already a day's ration. And so on the sixth day, there'll be two times more the ration. And that's all. This is very simple instructions. It's like that instruction in the Garden of Eden when God gave it to Adam, right? Well, you can eat from all the trees of the garden, but the from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for The day you eat of it, you shall surely die. And that would be the kind of a test. So God says, I want to test them. I want to know if you will walk. So God tested Adam. And so they are going to be tested by God in this case. Verse 6, we continue the narrative. It is a sequence that you can follow. And then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, the instruction is this: at evening you shall know that Jehovah has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, what does that mean? In the evening, the idea here is when the sky turns dark. At the time when the sky turns dark in the evening, you will know. And so there is going to be an experience that God had brought you out of the land of Egypt, by which time you will be fully aware, if you are not already, that you are no longer in Egypt. And then we are told, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord. So morning is when the day becomes bright. You can see, and you can see visually the glory of the Lord. When you say these things at the end of verse 7, it says this: you can see the weight of God. You can see the importance of God. What he says he will do for you. He hears your grumbling against him. Because when you grumble against Moses and Aaron, the Israelites are literally grumbling against God, because Moses and Aaron takes instruction from God, and God is trying to show the ultimate authority is God, Jehovah. And his vehicle, his instruments will be his people. The two specific one will be Moshe, Moses, and Aaron. Each has their role. Moses will be like God, Elohim, to Aaron, and Aaron becomes the mouthpiece. And so both of them are important because they are taking orders from God. But what are we when you complain against us? We are nothing. You can complain all you want because we didn't let you cross the Red Sea, isn't it? It is God who did all of it. And then we are told also, Moses said, when God gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning, bread to the full, for the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against Jehovah. This is how serious things are. They are just making complaints, but is literally making complaints against God. And God, of course, is upset. I mean, you think about it. God did 10 miracles, opened the Red Sea, crossed it, crushed Pharaoh's army and Pharaoh himself, restored the water at Marah, and they enjoyed themselves at Elim. And now they are in the wilderness, and then suddenly they forgot that all of those things happened. It does appear that the Israelites have very short memory. But observe this: God gives you meat to eat in the evening. Meat is flesh because they complain. Flesh is always in the evening for their dinner or supper. And in the morning, bread, cakes or bread. And then you can eat to the full. This is the Eastern Oriental diet and way of life in eating. And so God says, yes, I will give you meat and I will give you bread. Verse 9, it says, and then Moses spoke to Aaron. There is an important instruction here. Say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before God, for he has heard your complaints. Come near. The idea of come near is to approach God. Think about it. When we are told in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7, when they come near to God, they actually come to the tabernacle. And so here, when they come near before God, there is no tabernacle. There is no Ark of the Covenant. So where do they come? And so they would come to Moses, and they are to see what God is going to do. And so, verse 10, and then it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and suddenly they see the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Now, this is important. The glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The cloud is thick clouds. And they must see something in the cloud. That's in verse 10. What exactly did they see? Uh, I don't think we are told clear enough, but it is something that they can distinguish that it's not mere cloud, and this is the pillar of cloud. Pillar of cloud. And the pillar of cloud continues to be with them. And eventually, when they have the tabernacle, the pillar of cloud will sit on top of the tabernacle. And inside the tabernacle would be on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And so this is the, how would you say, the precursor. That the pillar of cloud is not just leading them through the wilderness and cross the Red Sea and protected them from Pharaoh earlier on. The glory of God, the very presence of God that you can see is in the clouds. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying this: At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I, the Lord your God. No, this is a very clear thing. When all these things happen, it says, Ani Yehovah. I am the Lord your God. I am. So Ani Yehovah Elohim. So you shall know. What does it mean? It means that you have seen and you can experience. The knowing of God in this case is not abstract. It is not internal that you can imagine. There's none of that in the text here. And so, what God is literally saying is this: He says, during the evening time at near sunset, you will eat flesh, which is the common food of the day or of the evening. And in the morning, and morning here would be the daylight part where there is bright, you will be filled with bread. So two things, meat and bread. And again, I've mentioned to you meat in the evening for supper and bread in the morning as they commonly eat to go to work. And once they have seen this, the conclusion should be you will know that Ani Yehovah Elohim. I am Jehovah, your Elohim. And it's all visual and it's all by experience. Verse 13. So it was that and quails would be those little birds that don't really fly at all. They don't fly much and they are kind of heavy. And so they came up at the evening time and they covered the camp where they were camped. And in the morning, the dew lay all around the camp. Dew means the little water droplets, the night mist, and it was so cold. On the ground, you would see droplets of water. So, two things you find. One is the birds came, and when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance. Now, this idea of a small round substance in verse 14 needs a little bit of uh, explanation, I guess. You can say that it is a small round, fine as frost on the ground. The first thing you need to know is this, that there was something thin, but it is not something round. The idea here is that it was something thin and flaky. Flaky substance. And the flaky substance is really like frost, like ice on the ground, right? Like ice on the ground. As if, right? This was as if. And when the children of Israel saw it, remember, all can be seen, they said to each other, and they said this, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Now, I think it is important to look at verse 15. The idea of this word, what? The word what is ma. It is an exclamation, ma. And it is a normal Hebrew exclamation. Eastern Oriental tends to exclaim a lot. And in this case, the Hebrew word is ma. Ma, ma, what is it? And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. They had quails, and now they see this ma. This is the bread which God says in the daytime you can eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. And the command is very simple. Let every man gather collected according to each one's need. And it says 1 omer for each person. This is the amount of the ration. You're not to collect over the amount, but you have to collect for each person in the household 1 omer. This is verse 16, very clear. According to the number of persons in the house, then let every man take for those who are in his tent. So the father of the house will come out, which is typical of the Eastern Oriental family. The father provides. And so the father will come out, collect enough for every single person in the home, in the tent. Verse 17, and it continues, and then the children of Israel did so and collected some more, some less. There'll be enough, but what happened is in verse 17, we are told obviously they didn't go out and bring a scale, right? There will be some who worked harder, so they had more. There are some who worked less, and so they had less. And when they measured by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Now, what does this mean? In verse 18, it is about weighing. And when they weighed all these things, it is interesting to see that everybody had enough for their own needs. The measuring here basically tells us this. When there was a lot, it seems that when the time came for measuring, uh, they didn't have any less. And when they gathered little and they went to measure it, they had enough to eat. Every man had gathered according to each one's need, which means that when even after they had measured, there was more than an omer, there's less than an omer, but it would even out somehow, by and large, that nobody will ever say, I don't have enough to eat. This in itself is telling us that they are to help each other out and to make sure that everyone's needs are given or met. The ones who had much need to help out those who don't have, so that at the end of the day, everyone will have enough. They are not. It doesn't also mean that everybody eats the same, because not everybody has the same appetite, and so there is no worry, right? So the principle here is there's no worry. There is always enough. And God makes sure of it. So doesn't mean that if you collect more, that is good. Doesn't mean you don't collect enough, that there's no good. God makes sure that while you're in the wilderness, He takes care of you and everybody will have enough. And Moses said this. This is a clear instruction. Let no one leave any of it till the morning. If you eat, you eat. But once it comes the next day, you can't keep it anymore. But the problem is that some people just don't listen. So, notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses. Verse 20 says that some people didn't, but some of them left part of it until in the daytime when it's bright, and then it bred worms and stank. This is a consequence. If you don't listen, you still don't get to eat because God makes it part of His law that you must listen. If you don't listen, there is a consequence. It doesn't mean that if you don't listen, you are smart and the next day you don't have to go and collect. No. The rule is that you have to collect every day. And so when they did not listen, Moses was angry with them. And so in the end, they gathered every morning, every man according to his need. If you eat less, pick less. It's okay. And when the sun became hot, it melted. So they have to do it before the sun became hot. So that in the morning, when the dew is still on the ground, before the dew dries up, they are to collect. That is the picture given to us. Verse 22. It says, and then they have seen the glory of God. Quail at night, and quail has no rules. The rules only apply to the muck, whatever they didn't know was on the ground. And they did the same. And on the sixth day, they gathered 2 times as much bread, 2 omers for each one, 2 portions, right? 2 portions. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Verse 23. And then he said to them, Moses said to them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest. In verse 23, it says, tomorrow is the Shabbaton. This is the word for this name. This is the Shabbaton. It is a celebration of Shabbat. You can call it that way. It is a holy Shabbat. It is a holy Shabbat. And this in itself is important. It says it's a holy Shabbat. But it's holy to God, right? It is holy to God. God wants this to be done. And so tomorrow is a Shabbat rest, and they are on the sixth day. And they are reminded, bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. What basically this means is this: bake everything you have to bake, boil everything you have to boil. Now, this idea of boiling is that water passes 100 degrees. Bake is to transform your dough into cakes or bread. And what essentially it tells us is do everything, do all the cooking today. That's basically it. And so the reason why the Jews don't boil is because they are told not to boil and not to cook and not to bake in that sense. So they laid it up until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it, because they the things that they collected on the ground was said that every day you have to consume, the next morning it will go bad. But on the sixth day, they were able to prove that come the seventh day, it was fine. So it says here, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh day, the Shabbat, there will be none. And so always remember, 6 day you shall gather, and this is work. Work to them, because every day they gather. So work really is their occupation at that point in time. Verse 27. And then it happened that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, and you can tell that there are some very obstinate people. Some tried to keep it to the next day, and it went bad. Some decided to go out and gather on the seventh day, and there was none. So it's proven. So what this does is that it proves God's word is true and faithful. This is important because not only is a test to them, it's really to teach them about God's laws, that there are consequences if you don't follow. And God said to Moses, He says, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Now, when he says, God says to Moses, it literally have Moses represent these people, some of them who went out, some of them who left for the next day. And God says, how long do you refuse? Now, the idea of refuse literally means uh, do not want to do. It is not merely ignoring, but it is being obstinate to choose to do the opposite. See, for the Lord has given you the Shabbat. Therefore, he gives you on the sixth day the bread for 2 days, and let every man remain in his place Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. As a result of this, the people rested on the seventh day. Again, I want to mention this is only with effect to the bread. It has no effect on the quail because they eat quail every day and there is no need to collect quail. So we are not told of any of these things, but this is a very specific law or Torah given to the people. What is so special about that is that this is a test. It is to examine their hearts, which is their minds, what they would choose to do. That if they choose to continue to be obstinate, God will deal with them. But as a result of this first week, that they have since learned that, yes, God is true to his word. Everything he says happened. And with this, they have to then listen to God carefully. Verse 31. After this 1 week, and then it says the house of Israel. Now, this house of Israel are all of Israel, all 12 tribes. They gave a name. Nobody wants to say, oh, that thing, but they gave a name. Now, the name in the English is manna, but the name in the Hebrew is man. The name in Hebrew is man. And so the English add the na to the back. But essentially it's man. But for the purposes of our familiarity of the word mana, we'll keep using the word mana. But for those of us who are now studying the text in the Hebrew, this is man. And the description of man is given to us. It was like white coriander seed, white color that sits on the ground. It's like white coriander seed because that is the thing that the Israelites know to resemble. And the taste of it was like flat cakes in honey. This word wafers is flat cakes. Flat cakes in honey. And by honey, this is an idea of syrup or very syrupy uh, and thick. So it could be bee honey, it could be date honey. And the idea here is that it has a sweet taste. That's what it's trying to say. It tastes very nice because this is something they eat quite a lot. And they find that it is it is similar to cakes. Notice it's not similar to meat. So all we need to see here is that it it is better than wheat and barley. Think of it. It's better than wheat and barley. It's got a very good taste, sweet taste, and you can use it to bake bread and make cakes. And then Moshe said this. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer, that's one portion with it, to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is the instruction of God as a reminder, a very visual reminder. Put it into a jar. And Moses said to Aaron, take a pot, put an omer of manna or man in it, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. And so, according to what God had commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the covenant, before the ark of the covenant. says here, before the Ark of the Covenant, which is to remind them. The Ark of the Covenant is a reminder. So whatever is in the Ark of the Covenant is a reminder. And this is a reminder that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, that God took you out of Egypt and God took care of you. And this is where it is to be kept. And the children of Israel ate man 40 years until they came to the inhabited land when they crossed the Jordan. They ate man until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. This is one portion. What we are told now in the conclusion of chapter 16 is that the manna, that they are to see it, they are to be reminded of it, they are to talk about it, and they are to remember that it was God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Hebrew people have what we call life object lessons. Life object lessons could be in a form of a thing like a pot of manna, bread, unleavened bread, the slaughter of an animal, the blood that was spilled from the animal. So all of these are symbolic. It's life object lessons that from those objects will remind them of what God did. It is not about just doing it as a ritual, but it is to remember the why. Now, human beings are strange people. You can get into a routine of doing it, and so they may forget the why and just do it because we are customary of doing things. We are Jews, or we are such a people. Our families did that, so we do it. But why, we don't know. And so God wants them to be very clear that it is I who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So inside the Ark of the Covenant, which is a reminder, would have a jar of uh, manna, and eventually they would have the 2 tablets of the law that God gave. And so all of that is to tell them these are the things that God has shown his power, his provision, and his instructions. 3 things, right? His power, his provision, and his instruction. And they are to be constantly reminded when they enter into the land of Canaan. Now, when they get into Canaan, no more man, right? The man lasted 40 years until they entered into the land. When they enter into the land, they conquer, they plant, they grow. And interestingly, when they left, they had a lot of animals, but they were not told to kill the animals. The animals were then left for clothing, perhaps, were then left for milk, perhaps. A lot of these, but we were never told that they were slaughtering any animals for their eating. And so quail was constantly given. But we can see later on in the book of Numbers that quail was not enough. And they murmured or grumbled again later in the book of Numbers. But as at this time, this is the beginning, we are also told one more point before we end, is that the Sabbath, being spoken of as a feast to be remembered by the Israelites, is the first time ever told in this chapter. And this was not told to the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Egyptians, or anybody else, because it is a beginning of a test, because the Sabbath is a test for the Israelites to see if they were willing to obey God, to listen to God in simple terms. So don't cook and don't boil water on the seventh day of rest. It is a special day to God. Don't do any of the things that you have been doing. And so, as we begin, you can see then that this Sabbath or the Shabbat is a very peculiar, unique event that is specifically told to us in Exodus 16 for the Israelites as a test of their willingness to obey God. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.